Thank you very much for inviting me to present here. I think I've listened very carefully and was very interesting in listening to these 2 days of presentation. I think many of these topics here are also relevant for the cancer cooperative groups in Europe, who constantly over the years, as the environment evolves, are asking themselves exactly the same questions. What are the trials that we should be doing, and what are viable models of cooperation with industry? Well, I've been asked to talk about two slightly different topics. One is what's going on in terms of clinical trials in Europe. There is a new legislation which is coming up in trying to address precisely the issue of, among other things, let's say a risk-based approach in terms of quality system for clinical trials. And then I'll talk a little bit about activities that we have across regions to between regulators to harmonize the approach to drug evaluation. Now, in terms of clinical trials, the setting is a little bit different. Although the European Medicines Agency is responsible for the evaluation of drugs and supervision of drugs once they're on the market, the countries of Europe have not given to the agency responsibilities in terms of design and conduct of clinical trials. So it's very possible that data from a trial will come to be used in a marketing authorization application, but the agency will not have been part of the design of this study, even if the study was conducted in Europe. So we have an advice that we give to companies, but it's optional. And we're not involved in authorizing the clinical trials. Well, what is the experience with many of the trials we have seen? First of all, there is let's say a claim from the cooperative groups in Europe telling us that the way the regulatory requirements are implemented in clinical trials is very costly and time-consuming. And it's a major challenge for academic researchers, but also for any drug developer, be it academic or industry. And we are always puzzled by this, because we point to our guidance, our legislation, saying, look, we have always said that the quality systems need to be proportional to what you're trying to achieve. And there isn't a blanket type of quality system that has to be applied. Still, there is fear, I think, in the environment on what if we miss that particular, I don't know, what if we haven't monitored that particular data, we haven't collected that particular data, which pops up in the end and could be disastrous. Probably there is also a very high push in the beginning to get those trials started, and just to take the time to think and to ask, what should we be collecting here? What should we be focusing on? Ensure that that part of the data collection is of high quality. That time to do that is simply not there, and there is too much rush in the beginning. So what is the way forward? Our new clinical trial regulation will further emphasize that there is the need to implement a risk-based approach. But more importantly, I think we need to once again reiterate that communication early on is important. And if cooperative groups are told by companies, or their own perception is that, no, we have to do all of this, it doesn't make sense, but we have to do it because it's a regulatory requirement. Well, no, let's discuss, and this can be done jointly with the two agencies across regions. So this concludes the topic on clinical trials. Let's look a little bit more in terms of harmonization. The angle that I'm taking here is the so-called productivity deficit. Why is there so much investment in this clinical cancer research and relatively few molecules reaching the market? Can we reduce development time? Can we reduce cost, attrition in general? And maybe one of the contributors is claimed to be heterogeneity of regulatory standards. In Europe, to regulatory standards, there is also now if you want, the prominent theme of divergent requirements between the regulators and the payers. I'm not going to address that in depth here. So what would be those reasons why there should be a regulatory difference requirements different requirements across regions like Europe and US. Well, one can think maybe there could be intrinsic or extrinsic differences that would mandate different requirements. Most likely, in most situations, this is a minority of cases. There could be differences in the health care environment, different definition of diseases, different type of co-medications. Again, I don't think this is the case here. So probably the differences we need to look at is more on one side the political and legal framework, if you want, but also some of the tradition. And importantly, there is a large number, I don't know exactly, but a large number of drugs which are approved both in US and Europe based on early access mechanisms. Now, the two mechanisms that we have are very similar in a number of points, but they slightly differ in for me, the critical point, which is in Europe, it is stated that even for an early approval, the benefit risk must be positive as for any type of approval. So the European regulator granting the conditional marketing authorization will have made the judgment, yes, the benefit risk is positive. Now, to move from that judgment, one needs to have new adverse information, detrimental safety, to go back to that judgment. Otherwise, this is not expected to change. Now, this is slightly different in the US, where the key concept is the approval based on surrogate endpoints reasonably likely to predict clinical benefit. There is an expectation that the further data will either verify or fail to verify the initial approval. And so between these two, there can be slight differences in this type of outcomes. Now, in terms of being able to communicate between agencies, since 2004, we have a confidentiality arrangement with US, Health Canada, etc. And this has enormously facilitated the ability to communicate. And this is now for oncology, which is probably the area which has mostly developed this interaction. This is now a regular, thanks to Dr. Pazdur, this is now a regular event and is very successful. Now, if we come to the proof is in the pudding, as I say. So when we come to say, now, okay, very good, we've been successful in setting up this collaboration. So do we have a lot of convergence now? Is it harmonized? Well, remember, the purpose has never been to align or harmonize or make sure that we come to the same regulatory conclusion. No, it's been to have good communications, synergy, and to try to understand if there are any important differences. Now, in terms of general guidance, not unexpectedly, as all of this is driven by the science, there are very few differences that you will see in our general guidance. The more difficult part is then when we come to the specific applications. And there, remember, regulators have to make decisions in the presence of uncertainty. So it is those situations where there is a maximum of uncertainties, small single-arm studies, heterogeneous population and so on, where probably you have the largest play of a number of factors. One is the benefit-risk balance, which has a value judgment component to it, which can be different from individual to individual. And the other one is this early access approval mechanism, which I told you, which in a way allows the surrogate endpoint let's say, aspect to play a bigger role in the US than it can play in Europe. And there are a number of examples, some areas where consistently there have been divergences, but this does not only occur in the area of rare diseases. There are areas like breast cancer, where there are some very good examples where there was a divergent outcome in the end. Again, take bevacizumab in breast cancer as an example. There, our initial judgment had been that that particular combination had a positive benefit risk based on the PFS data. And this was not for us a conditional approval, awaiting for confirmation in terms of overall survival. There are also counterexamples in the same area with the same endpoints, but here there were differences in benefit risk balance. So all in all, when we come to either areas of very high uncertainty or situations where the benefit risk balance is very, very close, that's where you can continue to expect, let's say, differences. And there is a review which has been recently done, which has seen that in addition to divergent approvals in the two regions, there is also another factor which we need to take into account, which is the time gap. The way things develop is so fast at the moment that a few years of gap between the two regions in terms of submission and authorization of the drug can obviously have an impact as well on the outcome. Possibly the key issue now where we need to think where possibly further harmonization is due is this issue of using PFS as a primary endpoint in registration trials. There are this is a prevalent endpoint. It's not something that we can simply dismiss. And everybody will always agree that overall survival is the most convincing endpoint, and in many situations it makes sense. Where there is a fundamental difference, I think, and now it's been written black and white and confirmed through practice, is that there is a perception in Europe that we can confidently say that a certain difference in PFS is a clinical benefit per se, and that this is not just some type of surrogate endpoint or some type of activity or whatever non-clinically relevant endpoint. And even within our community and our committees, this is a very very debated issue still. And although the balance goes in one direction, people are constantly saying, okay, this is basically based on assumption. It's never been proven, I don't know, with good quality of life studies or anything else, that a difference in progression-free survival is something which really is necessarily clinically meaningful. You're measuring this using radiological criteria. You're actually averse to the concept of clinical progression entering into the algorithm. Well, it doesn't make sense. If what you're trying to measure is something clinically relevant, you actually should be looking more at clinical progression and so on. And there are all the difficulties related to measurement error and bias in the assessment of progression. And lastly, when we use PFS as primary endpoint, which is clinically relevant per se, there's another thing which comes into play, which is the role of overall survival, where basically we're saying, okay, even if you don't have a confirmation of a positive effect in overall survival, what you want to have, especially if you're thinking of let's say, a first-line treatment with subsequent treatments there, you want to make sure that your first-line treatment does not have a detrimental effect on the subsequent treatment or delay unnecessarily and sort of remove the overall survival advantage. And so it becomes very important for us to be able to have enough power in the overall survival analysis to rule this out. And this power vanishes if one-way crossover is done in these trials, because then there is no data on overall survival whatsoever, and this makes it even more difficult for us. But to summarize, this area, this different understanding of the clinical relevance of PFS is something that we definitely want to work on. There are a number of areas where things are probably not going to change as long as there are very narrow benefit risk decisions to be made. It's almost like sitting on a fence, and sometimes one can expect divergences to happen. Also in situations of very rare diseases, single arm studies and so on, the way one manages that uncertainty can lead to divergences, where we certainly can, on the contrary, try to build further on this cooperation and harmonization is early advice when it comes to talking about the design of the studies. Companies are encouraged to request a joint scientific advice. They can talk to the FDA and EMA at the same time. And more importantly, what I would add in case of cooperative group trials, make sure that the cooperative group representatives are also there so that this does not become a sort of segmented discussion between different parties, and there can be a lot more discussion on that. And lastly, where we can definitely progress is try to get a better understanding of, if we want to continue to disagree on the PFS, or and then why, and if it's reasonable, or if slowly we could probably harmonize it also on this PFS aspect. Thank you very much.